This is Jean-François Dimelio from the Asia Center new studio in Paris. We just moved in our new premises, and this is where we broadcast from. Today, as a new edition of our webinars, we're very happy to be able to discuss the outcome of the 20th Congress of the Communist Party in China. And for that, we are very honored once again to have Jean-Pierre Cabestan, our close associate and partner to Asia Center. He's based in Hong Kong, as you know. He's a professor at Baptist University in Hong Kong. And as a discutant, today we are very happy to welcome Mrs. Isabelle Fong. She's a jurist, just like Jean-Pierre. So we have two jurists commenting on political issues in China, but probably also on many economic issues, because we have lots of topics which came out before, during, and after the 20th Congress. Isabelle is also closely linked to ULB in Brussels, Université Libre de Belgique. And she's a very frequent writer in Le Monde in France, and she's based here in Aix-en-Provence and Paris. She will discuss Jean-Pierre's speech, which will last about 15-20 minutes, and we are together for just 1 hour. For those of you who are based in Paris, I just remind you that we have an Indian event on Thursday afternoon at Maison Sugère, and we will speak about India's new positioning in international relations. And as a last word, as you can see, I can show you the latest edition of our Asia Trends, number 8. I can tell you that number 9 is already in preparation and will probably be issued early 23. Thank you very much for attending. Now, Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours, and thereafter, Isabelle will discuss your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-François. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the results of the latest party congress, the 20th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm very happy to be with you and with Isabelle Fong, who is a real jurist. I'm a fake jurist. I studied law in the past, but I've moved away from legal studies to political science some years ago. Although I keep an interest in legal developments, but well, the Congress is much more a political event than a legal event. As you know, the party has a constitution, which is its legal foundation to some degree, but it's a much more political document than the legal document. In any event, this party congress has been a surprise in many ways in terms of new leadership. I think, to put it simply, Xi Jinping has been able to consolidate his power even more than predicted. The report he presented at the Congress is shorter than before, but its content is very conservative. In a sense, it's kind of a return to Marxism. He wants to make sure the party will still continue to give priority to the public, to public ownership and the state-owned enterprises. It's a return also to a more self-centered economic development strategy, giving priority to what he calls domestic circulation. And clearly, the market economy is still important, but it's just one pillar of the economy. And it's qualified. It's not a market economy the way we understand it in the West. It's a socialist market economy. And I think in the West, the word socially, the qualifier, is very important. Now, actually, in the report to the Congress, there is not much new sentences or catchwords. I think Xi Jinping had sort of confirmed some of the objectives that the party had already laid down 5 years ago, including reaching, a 小康社会, a moderately prosperous society by 2035, and turning China into a rich, powerful, democratic, civilized and beautiful country by the middle of the century. So, but what transpires from that objective is, I think, is the word "qiang" or "qiangguo," which means a strong power. And then there is a clear emphasis on power here in his report, but also a clear emphasis on security. And the word security, for the one who have followed the report, has appeared quite a number of times in the report and during the meetings at the Congress, underlying both a priority given to security, but also a concern and some kind of anxiety about the future of the regime. Now, a few days before the Congress, you had this banner hung on one of the important crossroads of and bridges of Beijing municipality called the Sidongqiao. Someone, a kind of lone rebel or activist, asking for democracy, criticizing the PCR test, and asking for real, free talk and elections instead of having a leader, and nominally criticizing Xi Jinping. And that slogan has been picked up by a number of people around China just before the Congress, and now has been circulating around China with the help of airdrop and other means of communication. Now the question, of course, is how important that contestation of Xi Jinping's power is, but it's kind of it casts some kind of a shadow over the empowerment of Xi Jinping as the Congress was about to open. Now there is much more we can say about the report and the conclusions of the Congress, but we can come back to that a bit later. What I would summarize here is that there is not so much new in terms of new, orientations or priorities. The two major foreign policy priorities have been mentioned, and this idea of this initiative for global development, initiative for global security, with promoting the ideas that security is indivisible. But apart from that, the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives have been kept enshrined in the report. What I would say here is that the Congress itself, of course, it's a party Congress, so they had to do it in a way, but it's very much about strengthening the party, and giving even more, top-down power to the party leadership, and making sure that the party remains at the center of China's project of rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, arguing very clearly that the Communist Party is the fundamental guarantee of the success of the rejuvenation of the country. So clearly, a mixture of self-confidence and anxiety about the role of the party, but also a return to a more fundamental or more traditional form of Marxism in a society which in an environment which is in an economy which is much more globalized at the time of Mao, but an economy and a country which are also facing new challenges outside of China. What is interesting, there are two things which have not been mentioned by Xi Jinping in his report. One is this idea of strategic opportunity, and as if this strategic opportunity which allowed China to develop itself in an environment which was, rather hostile, this window is closing. And the other slogan, which was not so much mentioned, was the slogan of peace and development, as if the risks of crisis and war were increasing in the context of calling the war in Ukraine, but also of the growing tensions with the United States. Now, let me now turn to the leadership. I think there's been a number of important changes, and one incident which took place at the last day of the Congress was the unexpected departure of Hu Jintao's from the stage. and as we speak now, we don't know exactly what happened, whether it was for health reasons he had to leave the state, or whether there was another reason he was asked to leave. In any event, this incident, if I may say, unchoreographed or non-predicted incident, was in a way the symbol of the demise of the Hudindar faction. And a day later, we learned very clearly that that was a demise. Look at the new leadership. It's dominated by just one faction, the Xi Jinping faction. The other faction has been sidelined. All the members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo are very close to Xi Jinping. They've paid clear allegiance to Xi Jinping, all the way from number 2 Prime Minister Li Qiang to Li Xi, who is the 7th member, a former party secretary of Guangdong province, and who is now will be in charge of the Discipline Inspection Commission of the party. So what is striking is that this leadership is made of people in their 60s, but one, well, which is already 60, but was born in 1960 and not in 1950s. So it's an older leadership, no clear successor in line, apart maybe from Ding Xuexiang, but Ding Xuexiang was in charge of the party general office up to now, maybe promoted vice premier or vice president of the republic, but that doesn't mean he will be, Xi Jinping's successor. Actually, Xi Jinping is there to stay, maybe another 5 years, maybe another 10 years. He has made sure in promoting many of his followers that he will be able to stay in power for a longer period of time. Now, for the rest of the leadership, there's been a number of interesting promotions, but also exclusions. I will start with the demotion of Hu Chunhua, who was the only major surviving member of the Hudindar faction in the Politburo. And he was demoted, he was excluded from the Politburo and demoted to a position of Central Committee member. So he's only 59, and so he was born in 1963. So it means that for him, his career is over. And even if he's given some kind of position after the Congress or next year at the time on the occasion of the NPC meeting, I don't think he will recover any kind of influence within the top leadership of the party. Now, I'm looking at the time, so you have a few minutes more. Okay. Now, what else can we say about this new leadership is that many of the new members of the Politburo, which is made of only 24 members, were provincial leaders, so they've accumulated some experience in the provinces. But I think one of the things which have not been discussed very much by the observers is how much Xi Jinping is trying in promoting them and rewarding these leaders, these provincial leaders. He's trying to better control actually the periphery. And the fact that Li Qiang was, handpicked as prime minister after having presided upon the lockdown of Shanghai municipality for 2 months. And actually, as we know, in Shanghai, he's not liked at all. I think the Shanghai people, Shanghainese, must be happy to see him leaving, but unhappy to see him being promoted to the position of prime minister. But clearly, it's a reward to someone who has carried out the CCP instruction in the big city of Shanghai. And I can apply the same model, the same kind of pattern to other leaders who've been promoted over the provinces, including Li Xi, who got rid of all the labor NGOs in Guangdong province, or and other leaders who are coming from the provinces, and well, I don't want to mention too many names, but like Chen Min'er and others who are close to Xi Jinping himself. So I think what is also striking, and that's been mentioned, is the fact there is not a single woman in his leadership, and that within Central Committee itself, there are just 5% of women in the 205 Central Committee. Among the 205 Central Committee members, there are just 11 women. So it's less than just 5% of the total. So, so it's still very much a male-dominated system. Now, the question, of course, is whether with this new power lineup, leadership lineup, Xi Jinping will continue to concentrate all his power in his own hands and in the new structure that he set up after he came to power in 2013, like particularly the commission in charge of deepening the overall reforms, or whether he will push, give back some more power to the Prime Minister and the State Council. I'm inclined to think the latter, because now, Xi Jinping is 69, and he can rely on someone he trusts more than Li Keqiang. So we may observe some power moving back to the State Council, but that's in a way technical, because the final decisions will remain made by him. Finally, as predicted, there is someone in charge of foreign affairs in the Politburo who is now Wang Yi. Wang Yi is not a young chap; he's already 69, like Xi Jinping, but he managed to, elbow his way into the Politburo, thanks to paying allegiance to Xi Jinping, but also being a big promoter of the war for your diplomacy around the world, and so that has paid back, and he's now within the Politburo. So, in other words, I see a lot of continuity, and I will end on that. My preliminary remarks on with this 20th Party Congress, which has again helped Xi Jinping fully consolidate his power. A lot of continuity, but also more challenges and more uncertainty for the new leadership, because of the growing tensions with the United States and the West, but also because of and that was a big unknown, a big non-said during the Congress, the growing difficulties, economic difficulties within China. So I think the new leadership will be busy in, first of all, adopting or agreeing upon an exit strategy from the COVID, from the dynamic zero COVID strategy, but also relaunching the economy, which has slowed down quite a lot, and trying to also support to a larger extent that's been the case today up to now, the private businesses, in spite of the priority given to the public sector of the economy. And Li Qiang will have to play a role here, since his experience is the Eastern China, including Shanghai and Jiangsu and Zhejiang, may help him reaching out the private businesses and creating and helping the private businesses create more jobs, because clearly, if there is one challenge they need to meet within China, is to give more jobs to the Chinese society, and to the young people in China. So a lot of challenges, and maybe I would say, to finish, that Xi Jinping's power has consolidated, but also it may have plateaued, and we'll see in the coming years, maybe it's more contestation of Xi Jinping and more headwinds that he will need to overcome if he wants to stay in power another 10 years. I will end on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. That was brilliant, and you covered really many of the issues which were raised by those very interesting days. The floor now is to Isabelle for 5 minutes to pick up on some of your points, discuss them possibly, also bounce back on with questions to you, Jean-Pierre. We also welcome questions from the audience. Please put your questions in writing, and we will get them through the Zoom link. Samira, who is sitting beside us, will read them in English for us, for Isabelle and for you, Jean-Pierre. So feel free to ask questions whenever you have some. Isabelle, the floor is yours.
Firstly, thank you for your invitation, François, and thank you for the analysis and the comments of Professor Cabestan. And indeed, the 20th Party Congress of the CPP was watched by all China watch in this world. And we try to seek signals, but not so weak, because all signals are strong. And to try to figure out how Beijing will handle the economics, politics, and foreign policy in the years to come. And as Professor Capestan, I'm a jurist, I'm making legal studies, but when you are interested in China issues, you are obliged to be interested in politics, because in China, everything is politics. As we saw in this Congress, and one indication is that the economic data was expected on October 17th, but the National Bureau of Statistics announced a delay the day after the opening without any explanation. And then yesterday, and just after the closing of the Congress, this so unexpected data were released, and it's not bad. And this seems, this is not an indication that nothing will come to disturb the political agenda, because during the last Congress 5 years ago, these data were released as scheduled. There's no delay. And now we can say clearly that the signal is not weak. We understand that with the new team of Xi, as Professor Capestan explained, as Li Qiang or Cai Qi, they have no economic management experience, and Li Qiang will be the prime minister who will manage the world's second largest economy. And Xi, for the years to come, the ideology will prevail the economic growth. And I would like to ask how to say, it's a question to the European multinational who operate in Chinese market. Because since coronavirus, it was really surprising to see the European FDI, the foreign direct investment in China, has kept increasing in China. And so the people, when they see these figures, they said, wow, the Chinese market is not bad. It's continued to attract investors. But if we have a close look at these data, we can see that 80% of the FDI Europe come from only 10 big European companies, and a third of them come from Germany. And so in the new area and Xi's third term, when the environment will austere to the West, how will these European companies manage their risks and opportunities? And in case that China will declare the war to Taiwan, and how will these companies to handle their investments in China, and what will be their fate? That's the question. And another question, and I would like to discuss with Professor Capestan, is the future relationship of European Union with China. With a hard line after the 20th Congress, as you mentioned, the security has been emphasized in Xi's reports. In Xi's speech, the word security, 安全, had been mentioned 50 times. Well, in the last Congress, the word reform, 改革 has been repeated for more than 70 times, and this time is only 4 times. So now is the security first. And the Europeans since 2018 no, 2019, Europeans trying to adopt a line with China as a partner, competitor, and a rival. And at the same time, Europeans said that our relationship with the United States is allied, but not aligned, allié et non aligné. Is that still possible for Brussels to continue this line with China, since allied and not aligned, it will be very difficult to keep this line in case of war with Taiwan, because the Washington declared clearly that they will intervene in case of war, and I think it's on October 12th, the White House released a report on national security strategy. And in this report, the Washington said clearly that the PRC is the only competitor who has the intention and the increasing capacity to build a new order, new global order. So the Washington is calling for Brussels, his allies, to be aligned with it. So do you think that European should adopt it and modify his line with the Xi's new term?
Thank you. I think for us Europeans and for people who are trying, yes, to look at both the geopolitical environment and the economic and corporate environment, those are key questions. So possibly Jean-Pierre would like to pick up on those questions, and thereafter we'll take the question from the audience.
Okay. All right. Would you like me to answer? I mean, to react to Isabella's comments? Okay. No, very good. I mean, I think it's going to be very hard for the Europeans to ignore the recent decisions made by the Biden administration. In particular, the chip ban decided on October 7th, which has far-reaching consequences for a lot of countries, including countries which are very close to the US, like South Korea and Taiwan. For South Korea, you know, I mean, in Taiwan, Samsung and TSMC, they've got a waiver for 1 year, but within 1 year, they will have to change their strategy and to invest more outside of China, like India or Southeast Asia or the US, which has been already planned, and reduce their dependence upon the China market, at least for the top-notch semiconductors. But for Taiwan, it's going to be hard because Taiwan remains pretty dependent on the China market. And, you know, 40% or 42% exactly of Taiwan exports still go to mainland China. So it will take some time. I think the Europeans should think twice before, you know, continue business as usual with China. We are in a context of, what I would call Cold War, even if the word is not politically correct, because it's not been endorsed neither by the Biden administration or by the Xi Jinping government, but that's exactly where we are. So in a new Cold War context, it's hard to continue, you know, to promote globalization and integrate China in that globalization. Now, I know that that's not the opinion of the German Chancellor Scholz, who wants to, you know, promote globalization still today. Because he's under pressure from, the German companies to do so, but because the European economies are also very much intertwined with the Chinese economy. But at the same time, I mean, China is an important partner, but it's not a major partner compared to intra-European trade, but or even trade with North America. So. Now, on Taiwan, there's not much, what I would say, because I haven't discussed the CMC, Central Military Commission. There's been a number of signals sent to Taiwan by the Congress, in particular in the promotion of He Weidong, who was the commander of the Eastern China War Theater, the one which was in charge of conducting military exercises around Taiwan, in particular the ones which were organized in August after the Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. So I think it's a clear signal to the Taiwanese. Another question, of course, is whether China will continue with its gray zone tactics and operations, or whether it will cross the threshold of war. I tend to believe in the former because of the risks attached to a full-fledged war in the Taiwan Strait, and also because the United States and the Biden administration have repeated 4 times, as you mentioned it, that it will help Taiwan defend itself if China attacks. So I tend to believe that, and that's something which quite a number of people may differ with me on, that when the Chinese government is busy with domestic challenges, that the slowdown of the economy, getting out of the zero COVID strategy, and so on, it's not the time for launching an adventure, military adventure outside of China. But I may be wrong. What I see is the Chinese Communist Party political culture and tradition. Usually when China faces domestic problems and challenges, it concentrates on, the Communist Party concentrates on solving and overcoming those challenges rather than starting a military adventure beyond its borders, the borders of the country. But I may be wrong. So I will. Now maybe there are other questions we can.
Yes, Samira, let's have the questions from your voice.
Yes, so the first question is from Jean-François Isaac, and he asks whether the fact that some political personalities who generally belong to the more liberal faction and how they were put offline could represent a potential source of internal turmoil within the political and economic elites in the medium term.
Well, I don't think that first of all, I don't think that the Keqiang's faction is a liberal faction. It's more reformist. I think the liberals have been sacked from leadership for a long time. I mean, the real liberal, which are still new in China, in the Chinese Communist Party, or the people like Li Zhui or Yan Huangchunjiu, they all be eliminated. I mean, they're either dead or in jail or silenced. But the question is valid because the fact that the other factions are not represented in leadership now, the leadership is very monochrome. It may be a source of tensions, and it depends of the domestic and or international situation. Actually, if Xi Jinping doesn't manage well those challenges, of course it opens the way to criticism, to to pushback from other factions. But the question is, how much leverage do those factions have today in the current environment, which is very much dominated by one man, one thought. So we're back to very Maoist China, kind of. And I think people who are critical of China, of the leadership, are very cautious. But there is some opposition clearly to the current leadership. But how much can it materialize and change the political situation in China? I think that we may have to wait until after Xi Jinping steps down or retires or whatever that happens.
Would you like to add something?
I agree with Professor Capiston, and I don't think that there will be some terminal coming from the liberal, because they are never been the real, indeed, never been real liberal inside the party, and at the same time, China has become the biggest, the big brother, the big brother country. Even if there is some, the accident, as Professor mentioned just now, the Sitongqiao, the manifesto and put the banner protest. But is so the party has so tight grips on power, and they control all police and army. So even if there is some internal dissent, it will be destroyed from the beginning.
Yeah. We have other questions. There is one from François again, but we
Andrew Collier.
We may regroup questions according to what you can see as matching issues, Samira.
Okay, we can ask something about more the economy. So Francois Isaac, he always asks, he argues that the market are reacting negatively to the lineup of the new leadership, despite release of relatively better than expected GDP Q3 results. And he asks how the financial situation of the country, already not very sound, can evolve from this point on which are the next political steps on which the markets can count on, get clarification on the economic policies. And then always on the same subject, more or less, Mark asks, how do you think that the approximately 20% of unemployed young graduates could evolve on middle and long term? How does the PCC, how can the PCC handle this problem?
Okay. Well, maybe I say a few words to answer Andrew Collier's question, which is quite interesting. You know, Andrew is based in Hong Kong as well, yes. And he asked a question about the promotion of provincial officials. I think the way I understand the promotion of so many provincial leaders has been aimed at rewarding the provincial leaders which have towed the line, which have showed allegiance to Xi Jinping, and which have been very good at carrying out the instructions and the plans decided in Beijing. One of the usual challenges of any central government in China, any emperor of China, is to make sure that the provinces listen to the center. You know, the emperor is far away and the sky is high, and we know that a lot of local authorities, they tend to have their own way of doing things. And I think there's been a clear signal to the party itself, to the whole party, in promoting all these guys from various provinces, Zhejiang, Fujian, you name it, Liaoning and elsewhere, who've been with Jiangsu and Hebei, who now work in the center. They're going to move to the center for some of them, and I think it's one of the major concerns of Xi Jinping, because Xi Jinping is very powerful in Beijing, but less so in the provinces, and I think that's a challenge which every central government needs to tackle. And I just wanted to mention that before coming to the questions regarding the economy. Well, I have to say there is one, the reaction of the market has been triggered by the degree of uncertainty that China is facing now. I think people are worried because there is no signal in the party congress, in the report, Xi Jinping's report, and all the resolutions that have been made public, that China will continue to open up. It's part of what Xi Jinping said at the end of the Congress. He said, China needs the world needs China. Yes, but you have to prove it. And it's not, what he said, it was going exactly in the opposite direction. So that's why I think the markets are not convinced. Now, there's one guy who was promoted in Politburo is going to succeed to Liu He as the big economist of the party and the government, who is He Lifeng. But He Lifeng, yes, he worked for a long time at the top of the NDRC, National Development Reform Commission, but there is no guarantee that himself can, to answer another question, be the protector of the private sector. And so there is still a lot of uncertainties, and I think that the Xi Jinping, and his team will need to reassure the markets in the coming months, all the way to and even before, I would say, before the meeting of the next NPC, the next NPC meeting in March of 2023, because we still have 5 months and I think the situation is really pressing. As far as the housing sector is concerned, as far as what to do with all the people who pay a mortgage, and we have decided to boycott the mortgage because they haven't got their flat. You need to assure a lot of people in China. And not to mention, of course, the youth, which are unemployed. And I have to say some of, and the reasons many young people are unemployed because they are university graduates, and the only job they get is below their level of competence. So they don't want to, to do jobs which are below their, what they can usually expect as a job. So that's what I would say. Yes. Finally, on zero COVID, there is no. I mean, as far as we speak, I mean, as far today, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. We don't know. There is no exit strategy, no indication. And on the contrary, I think that Xi Jinping has doubled down on these so-called dynamic zero COVID policies. So I don't see any, and that's the reason why actually Hong Kong decided to go its own way and to open up Hong Kong, because otherwise Hong Kong will have really witness a very sharp decline of its activities if it had not lifted many of the restrictions imposed earlier. So now in Hong Kong we have a 0+3 kind of quarantine, but in mainland China it's still 1 week. So for how long? So there is a bifurcation here, and which show that in China there is no exit strategy as far as we speak now.
I want to react to the question of David Barres, what happened to the representation of the private sector in the Central Committee. And indeed, I think under the president decays, and the private sector, indeed, they got a voice. They got a voice inside the government. But now, as what we have seen, what happened to Alibaba and what happened to other private companies, and now is the state is the back to how to say, and now the place will be given to the state companies, and the private sector will get more and more room to operate. And even if there are some representative inside the Central Committee, their voice, I think, will be silenced. And Mr. Xi Jinping, he will count under the new team. They will count on the state companies, state-owned company, not on sectors. 所谓国进民退. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And also I want to say some word about the high employment. The high of the urban youth is one young people in 5, as yes, 20% of young Chinese when they go out of their university campus and they get employed. That yes, that indeed is an issue, but is not as serious as in in Europe, because in the culture, in Chinese culture, young people, if they can't find a job, they stay at home and they will be supported by the family. And it is a problem, but not as the concern is not as big as in Europe. I just read the speech of the Minister of Education. They began to issue some measure to help these young people to find a job and to tell them not to 躺平, not to 躺平, and to accept the less qualified job.
Yes, that's an issue.
If I may, Isabel, yes, the issue is not as big as in Europe, because in Europe it's a long-lasting issue, and especially in France. When you say Europe, actually, France is the place where the issue of joblessness for the young people is the biggest. However, you have a situation whereby for years and years and years, what the party has sold to the population is a bright future.
Yeah.
And okay, you may get comfort from your family, but if you do not sell a positive future to young generation, then you have an issue.
That's indeed, that is true. Since the high employment of the youth in the city, we said the statistic 20% is only in the city. There's no statistics for the people in the countryside. And indeed, if the party begins to worry about this jobless, this massive jobless young people, because they get educated and they have no job, they are indeed the people who are supposed to protest. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the issue. The other point is the words in Xi Jinping's speech. The words like "fendor," fight, fighting spirit was very much in usage in his speech. You can fight another country, you can fight for a battle, but you can also fight to have the country succeed. So you need to have a fighting spirit in the young generation, because the fighters are supposed to be the youngest. The conditions are not there for the young generation to fight for something.
Yes, but now the young generation, maybe most of them, they lose a girl for which they should fight. They are ready to fight with. And one reason of the high employment is the private sector. The private sector in China now they began to lay off. They began to lay off. And so these young people, before, most of them, they tried to get a post, to get a position inside the private sector, like Tencent, like Alibaba. And now, for the dream job for young Chinese is to work in the government, to be a civil agent. And so they prefer to prepare for the exam to enter into a government, even in a small city, than to work in a private company. Yeah.
François comes back on the stage.
Yes.
Shall we pass through some questions about Taiwan?
Yes, can you speak louder? I can't hear you.
Yeah. So François Isaac, he suggests that the fact that China is busy with domestic challenges
Yes.
divert from strong actions against Taiwan, but actually the very fact might lead to the Chinese leadership to research tension with Taiwan to divert attention from domestic audience away from poor economic performance, which was previous basis for consensus with the people before. Instead, Paul instead asks maybe if there was in fact an invasion of Taiwan, could foreign investments be held hostage in China in case of sanctions, and what impact would this have on foreign companies in China?
Okay, I'll first answer the second question. Of course, I mean, look at the sanctions we've taken against Russia. So yes, and I think the foreigners, the Westerners living in China will be maybe detained. Even in Hong Kong, we may be detained because we are on the wrong side of the fence. So if there is a war in the Taiwan Strait, so I hope it won't happen. But you know, that's exactly what happened during World War II. Even the Japanese residing in the US were put in detention camps. So that's the usual thing. So of course, I mean, if there is a war, I mean, everyone can become a hostage of the other side. Now, the question raised by François Issa regarding, yes, you know, the relationship between domestic challenges and the war in Taiwan, I would say that, of course, nationalism has always been used as a glue and it will continue to be used as a glue, and the Taiwan issue can be used as a diversion from domestic problems. But does it mean that China will launch a war? I think it'd be because you know, again, as I said earlier, to start a full-fledged war against Taiwan presents so many challenges, so many risks of escalation, of nuclearization of the conflict with the United States, that I still believe that Xi Jinping will think twice before launching an attack. I may be wrong because, you know, I'm not in Xi Jinping's head, but what I think is that it will carry on and maybe intensify military intimidations against Taiwan in the coming years. But I think the Chinese leadership is still waiting for the 2024 presidential election in Taiwan to see who is going to win. The problem is it's rather unlikely that the Kuomintang comes back to power. So it means it's more a DPP candidate who's going to make it, and you know, carry on Tsai Ing-wen's approach to China. It means that he will not abide by the 92 consensus and the One China principle. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, if I may, there's a scenario which combines what we have seen recently and the deadline that you mentioned, which is the election, the next presidential election. Would not a partial blockade organized just during the presidential campaign, like we saw in 1996, work out to promote a party in Taiwan more favorable to discussing with China? In other words, putting pressure through a partial blockade, which would not trigger intervention from the US, and then influence the voters in favor of what would remain of KMT if something remains of KMT at the time.
But it may very well backfire. We don't know. That's the problem. You remember the warnings made given by Zhu Rongji in 2000. Actually, that helped Chen Shui-bian being elected. So we have to see, wait and see. But well, there are trouble ahead of us anyway. Yeah.
I would like to react to the question of Mark Maynard and about the domestic and international tourists and the zero COVID policy. And indeed, since the coronavirus, the tourists inside China at the beginning, it kept it kept in as Europe. It was as Europe, but since the zero COVID policy, since the Omicron and the tourists inside China was slapped, and only 2% of the flights scheduled as before coronavirus reopen. And as for international tourism, China and outside, I think it almost as zero. That is what I heard from China.
There is a question on the South China Sea by Christine Cabasset. I don't see any major changes. I think China, on the one hand, is gradually dominating the South China Sea. The US has continued its FONOPS, freedom of navigation operations, and China at the same time is trying to negotiate with the Southeast Asian countries, in particular the other claimants of South China Sea, a code of conduct. But I'm not too optimistic about that. The result of this negotiation, I think, in that respect, the negotiation is more important than the outcome of the negotiation. So because it's a way for China to keep a close channel of communication. I mean, it's a strong and dense channel of communication with the Southeast Asian countries. What I can see that with the new president in the Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in the Philippines has moved close to the US, and so he's not as accommodating as Duterte, at least at the beginning of his presidency, towards China. So we'll see. But it's hard for the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries not to keep some kind of balance between China and the US. But clearly the US will remain part of the equation in the South China Sea.
I saw the question is for me about the young, employed, educated people who still want to move to US or EU to say voting visa fit. I just want to give you two figures. And last year, there are more than, I think it's more than 40,000 or 50,000 young Chinese. They got a visa to study, to pursue their study in US. And the UK in 2021, UK has never received so many Chinese students from mainland. That means that the young Chinese people, the educated one from, not rich family and family who can pay their fees, they continue to try to make their study in US or in Europe. But at the same time, I observed there's quite a few quite young people, and they began to conceive that to pursue their study in foreign country maybe it's not necessary, since China is so strong and is so big. We don't need to go out to go abroad. But in big cities, the young educated people, they try to go to what visa fits. Yes, that's true. But at the same time, is the China, how to say, to make their study in a foreign country, you need money. And if the Chinese currency yuan continue to devalue it, that means their means. Yes, they will lose their means to go.
And what about the passport issue? Do you get a passport?
Yeah.
You get a passport if you have
Yes, and maybe Professor Capestan can complete. And my friends in Beijing and in Shanghai, in these big cities, and that means in small cities, we don't need to mention it. In these big cities, the only way now to get passport is to work for professional reasons or for study. So if you have the offer from a foreign university, you can get the passport. If not, you can't get your passport. Yes.
Yes, and studying abroad is also a way of going around this unemployment. So among my students, coming to Hong Kong and completing an MA, Master of Arts in Hong Kong, a top master degree in Hong Kong, is the parents have enough money to pay them 1 year or 2 year study in Hong Kong or overseas, and go back to China with a better degree, which will allow them to get maybe a better job. But it's a way of managing the current difficult job market, and postponing the decision to enter the professional life in studying overseas for a while. There is one thing I would add to what Isabelle said, is the fact that in the US, at least, the climate for the environment for Chinese students has become more challenging. Because for the students studying science, all these sensitive subjects, under the scrutiny of the FBI, and it's getting more. I'm not saying for everyone, but you study literature or political science, you may be not too much into trouble. But if you're studying hard science and top-notch technology, that's maybe.
If I have 2 minutes, I want to say some word about the Chinese students in the US. Indeed, now the Chinese students who apply for visa to make the study of STEM, that means science, technology, engineer, and mechanic, and their visa are refused. And in 2021, among the 40,000 or 50,000 visa delivered, there are only 500 visa were refused, because this visa is for STEM. And in MIT, I heard from friends in MIT, since 2 years, there's no more Chinese students accept to MIT. That means if you come to US to make the literature, philosopher, political, there's no problem. Yes. Okay.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you very much to both of you, and thank you for participating in this webinar, to all of you who joined us through the Zoom link. We were very happy to host you today once again, and very thankful to Jean-Pierre, who has to rush to lecture at Hong Kong Baptist University again. We could have, of course, lasted for much more today, but we have to release you and thank you, and remind you that we will always be posting invitations for such webinars in the months to come. There will be many topics to discuss. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you, Isabelle. Thank you, Jacinta.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye now.
Yeah.